Hi guys, Legend of All 101 here once again. Bringing another reaction to Storydive's Season 3 breakdown of American Gods. This time episode 2. We're out here. So I'm trying to be quiet once again. People are sleeping right now, so. Hey. Twitter, Instagram right down here. Thumbs this video up, share the video, subscribe, press that notification bell so I'm in your inbox all day, every day. And put your comments in the comment section down below. So let's get into this show without further ado. We're gonna do this. Tell me you're ready. 3, 2, 1.
Hello everyone, this is Storydive, back again, reviewing and breaking down the Easter eggs and references in another episode of American Gods. This time Season 3, Episode 2, titled Serious Moonlight, which of course is a reference to Shadow Moon, and also a lyric from David Bowie's song Let's Dance, and its associated tour. This episode was a bit more intriguing for me than the first episode of Season 3. There was a lot going on here, and a lot of interesting references to mythology and folklore, as well as Easter eggs and hints toward things we might see in the coming season. So without further ado, let's get to that. After the recap of last episode, the show starts out in the Wisconsin territory.
This was an interesting opening to the show, and I want to see what Storydive has to say about this, because I was like, wow, the sacrifice, because it looked like the child, one of the humans, it looks like the Red Indians, was praying to something. I think it's a Thunderbird. He had like the totem at the starting on the intro, and it looks like because the Vikings are trying to snuff him out. So yeah, so their god wasn't strong enough to stop him against Odin.
In 1690, we hear the voice of what is likely a tribal elder recounting a creation story of this particular people. He says when the Great River, Mississippi, which means Great River originally in the Anishinaabe languages, gave birth to the first ones, they asked Inamehiwak, the Thunderbird, to watch over them. In the last episode, Whiskey Jack, aka Wisaki Jack, referred to the Thunderbirds as Enamaki, but actually in the Algonquin languages, there are several ways to say it, including Enamaki or Inamehiwak. Although I probably mispronounced both, but you get the gist. The Thunderbird is actually a symbol of the Anishinaabe people. The term Anishinaabe refers to several native nations, including the Ojibwe, Oji-Cree, and Algonquin peoples, among others. In the last episode, an Easter egg I missed was that when Shadow drives through Minnesota on the animated map, the lightning and thunder of the Thunderbird flashed, and the Viking statue Shadow was actually the symbol of the Thunderbird. The Elder also says the Thunderbird battles Mishikanubik, the horned serpent, which is the traditional enemy of the Thunderbird in mythology. This also might be the form Wisaki Jack was taking in the previous episode. Through this opening sequence, we can see several passing shadows, which are likely Thunderbirds overhead. Then the camera pulls back to reveal that this village has been attacked by, quote, traders.
Right down Thunderbird. I love the lore of this show. I love stuff like this, man. I actually love it. I know a lot of you people out there love it too. This stuff, I love lore. And if you do lore, I love it.
On IMDb, these two are listed as French trader and German trader. One of them speaks French, and the other speaks, I assume, German, although it sounds like he also speaks Old Norse, or possibly Old High German, I'm not sure. These two traders have slaughtered almost everyone in the village, but a bad storm is on its way. Likely this was summoned by this tribal elder, who called on the Inamehiwak to help them. Thunderbirds are thought to cause storms, as their wings create the thunder, but this German trader, as a way of fighting the Native American gods, calls on one of his own gods, an old Germanic god, who he calls Hodekin, the Dark One, to basically call away the bad weather.
Hodekin, I thought it was Odin, but obviously not. Let me see. Hodekin. The Dark One.
And in fact, he sacrifices this poor girl to this god. Hodekin is the name of a kobold in German folklore. Kobolds are basically elf-like house sprites, or spirits associated with a certain... certain area. However, he calls Hodekin the Dark One, which makes me suspect that he's actually associating the name Hodekin with the Norse and Germanic god Hoder, or Hoder, to use the Old Norse pronunciation.
Yeah, cause I was thinking it's got to be Norse. There's something Norse about it. It had to be Norse. That's what I got from it. It's something Norse.
There is no evidence I could find that Hodekin is associated with Hoder, or Hodekin originates from Hoder, although generally speaking, a lot of folklore figures are thought to be adapted from older gods, like Mad Sweeney, who was once the Irish god Lugh, but later became a leprechaun. I suspect they're attempting to do the same thing with Hodekin the kobold here. Also, there's another detail regarding the kobold that I will get to at the end of the video because it's sort of a spoiler. Hoder is thought to be the Norse god of darkness. He is blind and is also associated with winter, as winter is the darkest season. As we can see in this scene, it is winter. He also references Thor's hammer, saying the hammer flies across the sky. This also supports that Hodekin is from the Old Norse or Old Germanic pantheon, and likely Hoder. But I could be wrong that there is any connection to Hoder. Because they told us this is Wisconsin, I have to suspect that this area is what would later become Lakeside, and we're essentially witnessing the birth of Lakeside here. In the last episode, when Wisake Jack referred to Wednesday being complicit in the erasing of his history, I thought he was referring to the...
That's what I'm saying. This is what I thought it was Odin, because when they were speaking about what the kind of the language, and I was like, the way it was written, I was like, it's Norse. It's something to do with Odin.
Old Norse exploration of America, but now it seems more likely he's referring to this. Picking up from the previous episode, we find out that the person who put the gun to the back of Shadow's head is in fact Marguerite Olsen, a journalist for the local paper and also the property manager of this building apparently. Marguerite does eventually let him in, although she's kind of a jerk about it. That's likely because she's suspicious of strangers due to her missing son, based on a few clues I'll get to later. Once inside, Shadow goes to sleep and dreams of his childhood. He is holding his mother's hand in a supermarket or store, turns to one of the magazines, Explorer, and this woman starts to talk to him, saying, "We have waited for you, and much is required of you." The actress on this cover is Bridget Ogundipe, I hope I said that right, and she is playing the Orisha Yemoja, also known as Yemonja or Yemaya in some countries. Yemoja is a goddess of water, rivers, and especially the Ogun River in Nigeria, so perhaps it's not a coincidence that the actress actually has Ogun in her name. Ogun is also another Orisha, who I'll get to if we see him, but on this cover you can see it says beautiful Nigeria, which is one of the major countries that the Yoruba people are in, although they are in a number of West African countries. The Orishas seem to be trying to get through to Shadow, although before he can really connect with Yemoja and the other Orishas, he's chased by the bison or buffalo, the representation of the American land, and basically separated from them, which might have a sort of metaphorical meaning. America is pulling him away from his African ancestry right now. Then we cut to New York, where Bilquis is now in her new fancy pad, and at first she appears to be doing some kind of role-playing with this guy who's dressed as tech assistants, but when he touches her, she says there's no touching allowed, at which point he gets very angry and reveals that he's the head of the largest IT company in the world. He says his name is William Huntington Sanders, and he likely owns Bilquis's app, Sheba, but he's not satisfied with the arrangement the way it is. Bilquis seemingly gives in to his advances, but she actually has other motives. She consumes him with her usual method. He is another willing sacrifice to the goddess Bilquis. However, afterwards she appears sick, so it appears something is not right with her usual method of worship. Shadow gets an invite to a Kolaida festival celebration in Chicago from Zaraya Polnochnoya, the Midnight Star. Kolaida is an ancient Slavic winter solstice festival, and apparently this one is in honor of Zaraya Verchernaya, the Evening Star, who was shot and killed in the last season. The Midnight Star says we must speak of your head and your heart. Of course, his head is promised to Chernobog to hit with his hammer from the first season, but regardless, Shadow tries to figure out how to get to Chicago, and as he's on his way to town, he gets picked up by Henselman, who gives him a quick lesson on Lakeside's history, the benefactor Lester Hamilton and its Norse or Germanic roots, as well as its famous pasties, which is a traditional English food, especially associated with Cornwall, as Henselman says.
Brought it over here from Cornwall.
And actually, in some folklore, pasties are used as offerings to Cornish fairies. Also in the background, a cover of the song Always Something There to Remind Me plays, which for people that have read the book, I think is a reference to the lake. There's
Cornish pasties were gifts to the fairies. That is interesting. Okay, alright. The fairies. Never thought about that. Never even thought of it. Damn, okay.
Something going on with the lake, and it's always
Something new.
there in view of the town. While he's in the store with Henselman to get a jacket, Shadow runs into Allison McGovern, who he met when he first arrived in Lakeside, but later on in the episode, Allison will go missing. Henselman pressures Shadow into betting on the Clunker, which is the car that will eventually drop into the lake. People bet on when exactly it will do that, and some kind of freezing power highlights March 23rd from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m., so that's what Shadow bets on. From there, we cut to the dentist's office of Dr. Tyrell, who we soon find out is the Norse god Tyr. He's a god of war as well as justice, but in the modern world, he has taken the role of a dentist, perhaps because he can collect children's teeth. In Old Norse superstition, it was thought that children's teeth were lucky in battle, and after all, he is a war god. Some suspect the tradition of the Tooth Fairy goes back to the Old Norse tradition of Tantfei or Tooth Fee. So in a weird way, maybe Tyr is a kind of Tooth Fairy? Okay, not really. He's not the Tooth Fairy in the same way Odin is not Santa Claus, but it is an interesting detail. Wednesday meets up with Tuesday, Tyr, then goes into his office where he has a number of artifacts, including the sculpted head of Fenrir the wolf, the creature that bites off his hand in Norse mythology. In Norse mythology, it's his right hand, but here we can see that actually his left hand is missing. He has a prosthetic there. Wednesday says, when was the first time our soldiers carried our totems into battle, referring to the Fenrir head, and Tyr says when Gudfred effed up that Frankish business, definitely referring to the Danish King Gudfred and his conflict with the Carolingian Empire, or the Frankish Empire. He also says the last time was the Battle of Yorktown, when they posed as Hessian Jaegers, or German infantry in the British Army. Of course, the British lost the Battle of Yorktown to George Washington and the Continental Army, and Tyr says they abandoned the Hessians and joined Washington. Wednesday then turns away this sculpture of a bird. I'm not sure what this bird is a reference to, but it might be a reference to the Jotun Hreisfylgur, which takes the form of a giant eagle and whose wings create the wind, very much like a thunderbird, or possibly it's one of the three roosters that crows at the beginning of Ragnarok. Possibly Wednesday turns it away because he doesn't want to face Ragnarok just yet. Then Wednesday notices a Happy Solstice card from Demeter, the Greek goddess of the harvest, addressed to Dr. Tyrell, and of course he steals it so he can get Demeter's address. He also didn't receive an invitation to the Kaleida Festival in Chicago, so Tyr unknowingly lets him know where that is as well. Wednesday also gets a financial donation from Tyr, and before he leaves, Tyr addresses him in Old Norse. Meanwhile, back at Lakeside, the worst thing Chad Mulligan has to deal with at this point is a panty thief. Kinda reminds me of Happosai from Ranma 1/2. Then Chad helps Shadow secure a car so he can get to Chicago, which ends up being Marguerite Olsen's son, Sandy's car. And of course she's a bit hesitant to loan it out because Sandy has been missing, likely for about 2 years at this point. Eventually she relents, and again we see the logo of the Lakeside Thunderbirds. I think it's a sports team there. Checking back in with Salim, he appears to be back in Cairo at the funeral home with Mr. Ibis, although Mr. Ibis calls it Cairo, the traditional pronunciation.
What brings you back to Cairo?
Salim still isn't satisfied with the djinn leaving, and he wants to know for sure if the djinn loves him or not, but he decides to go with Mr. Ibis, who is invited to the Festival of Kaleida in Chicago. On the back of Sandy Olsen's car, we see another Thunderbird symbol, because the car is a Ford Thunderbird. And Shadow listens to Sandy's CD, at which point he figures out that Marguerite has a son. He also manages to hit a deer who seems to be perfectly fine. In Chicago at the Kaleida Festival, we see a picture of Zaraya Vachernaya when she was young, or rather an old photo of Cloris Leachman. Chernobog, the Slavic god of evil, of course, is very upset and says how much he hated her cooking. At which point Shadow arrives, and Wednesday arrives. Both of them are bearing gifts. Shadow has a Harlequin romance novel for the Morning Star, Zaraya Utrnyaya. Chernobog is not impressed with either of them, but Shadow goes up to the roof where the Midnight Star is, Zaraya Polnochnaya, and she makes an interesting reference saying Shadow is always half in light, half in shadow. After which she takes his silver dollar, which she plucked from the moon in the first season, and puts it back into the sky as the moon. The light and dark reference is interesting because his name is Shadow Moon, like the shadow of the moon. In a video which I will link below, I talked about Shadow's potential relation to the Norse god of light, Balder, but here she's saying he's half light and half darkness, so perhaps he's half Balder and half Hodor. While all this is going on, Wednesday and Chernobog are doing some kind of folk dance where they slap each other a lot and drink vodka. I hope they work their differences out. As Wednesday said earlier, they are surrounded by Slavic gods, so he's partially there to inspire and recruit them for his war.
To the true gods!
While Shadow is outside, he chats with Cordelia, who explains that she got kicked out of Hunter College for hacking and picked up her gig with Wednesday on Craigslist. But there seems to be something more to her story that she isn't telling us. In the background of the shot, you can also see an ad for a vodka called Evening Star Vodka. In other words, the vodka of Zoraya Verchernaya. When Shadow gets back to Lakeside, all of a sudden people are looking at him funny. They're suspecting him for the called Evening Star Vodka. In other words, the vodka of Zoraya Verchernaya. When Shadow gets back to Lakeside, all of a sudden people are looking at him funny. They're suspecting him for the disappearance of Allison McGovern, and in fact, Chad questions him on this, although his answers check out. He then goes out into the woods to collect firewood because there's still no heat in his apartment, and he sees a peacock, which, if you didn't know, are not native to rural Wisconsin. It is very likely a manifestation of the Orisha Oshun. Peacocks are a symbol of Oshun, and she even transformed into a peacock in one story, so likely that's who this is. Because Shadow's story checks out, Marguerite cuts him a little slack and turns on his heat. He also returns the sticker with the Lakeside Thunderbirds logo on it, and asks about her son, but she doesn't quite tell him that her son is missing. Later, Shadow looks outside his apartment window and sees large shadows going over the lake, which I think is definitely a Thunderbird passing over the clunker on the lake. And over this we hear a version of an Old English ballad called Fair Margaret and Sweet William. Of course, Marguerite Olsen has a similar name. In this case, I think it's a reference to Marguerite Olsen missing her son, Sandy. But those are all the Easter eggs and references I noticed in this episode of American Gods. I would love to know if you noticed something that I didn't in the comments below, or if I got something wrong. I waited until the end of the video to say this, but the following is a spoiler from the book, so if you don't want to know it, click away now, or as I'm talking right now to give you a little bit extra time, a spoiler is coming. Earlier when I mentioned the kobold Hodekin, I didn't mention that another type of kobold is called Henselman. And of course in the book, Henselman is a kobold. They've changed a bunch of things from the book, and I don't know if Henselman in the series is also a kobold, but it's interesting that the Germanic trader invoked a kobold. We'll have to see how that plays out in the series. If you enjoyed this video, give it a...
Interesting. She's a trickster. Interesting. Okay, so... Yep, there you have it. Episode 2 breakdown of American Gods, Season 3. So, remember to follow me at Twitter, Instagram, my main two places you can find your boy Legendable 101. Thumbs the video up, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and press that notification bell so I'm in your inbox all day, every day. And remember, you know what to do. Comments in the comment section down below. I know what you guys think about this, man. Come on. Storydive does a great job as always, man. Hey, salute. There you go. There we go. So, wherever you are day or night, stay safe out here in these streets. This is Legend of All 101 signing out. Peace.